Hello and welcome to the show. This is Matthew Kalinsky, and this episode is Staffing Industry Discussion, the video podcast with Jamison Brissette. He is the founder of Commonwealth Staffing Services, and I'm really excited about bringing him on board today. Jamison is going to be one of those people that you're going to learn a lot of information from, not only from the heart of an entrepreneur, somebody who was born ready to be an entrepreneur, but just realized it. But more importantly, he's developed the skill set over 10, 15 years of being in recruiting and staffing and being around the industry to really understand the ins and outs. And so I'm looking forward to having this staffing industry discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Jamison on to the show. Hello, Jamison. How are you?
I'm doing well. And yourself?
Doing great. Thank you very much for taking the time to be a guest on the show. And I'm looking forward to kind of just having a great discussion about the ins and outs of everything going on with you and the industry itself.
Sure. I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
So if you don't mind, just kind of giving the listeners a little bit of background on your life in terms of how you got into staffing, recruiting, and when you decided that it was your time to start your own firm.
Sure. So I think like most people who get into recruiting, no one gets out of school, no one gets out of college and says, yes, I would love to be a recruiter. I think most people generally fall into recruiting, right? For better or worse.
Yep.
And some of us stay here. Many of us do not. So the way that I came into recruiting was I had been with my partner for about a year.
Okay.
And he had a couple of goals in life. Pretty simple guy, which is really nice for me. But he wanted to go, he wanted to go to Hawaii. He wanted to buy a house. And he wanted to find somebody that would be loyal, that he could spend the rest of his life with, right? Pretty simple.
Those seem like great goals to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one takes a lot of time, or a little bit of time, right? Which is sussing out the loyalty piece. The other one, buying a house, I had already done that multiple times, bought and sold. And so had the roadmap for that.
Okay.
And then the third, it's a vacation. We'll eventually get there, but foundations first, right?
Maybe after COVID. Yeah, you could
get exactly. And so, he worked for the state in Massachusetts, and I was living in New Hampshire at the time. And I just said, you know what? Let's jump. Let's just buy a house. If it doesn't work out, we'll sell it, split the profits. I'm a sales guy. I'll move.
I'll make it work. What year was this? What year was this about?
2009.
Okay. So last kind of major recession, and of course, a great way to change careers at that point.
Absolutely. Sure. And so we did. We bought the house and moved down here, and ultimately fell into the first job that I got, which was staffing.
What were you doing? What was your entry-level position? A recruiter, account manager?
Account manager.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Oh, that's okay.
I was an account manager. Yes.
Okay.
And then, I did that for about 2 years or so and realized that there was a huge gap in my skill set, which was recruiting. And so I moved on to doing executive recruitment for supply chain and procurement, specifically in and around Boston within PCG, consumer goods. And so that's where I really learned over a good year and a half or so what it meant to do this business as a relationship-oriented business, right? Not strictly transactional, but really relationship-oriented and networking.
People helping people. I mean, that's the core of staffing and recruiting.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And so, I'd worked for a couple of other firms, outside of that firm. In my career, I did high-volume recruiting, transactional recruiting, not overly relationship-oriented.
Right.
And through trial and error, realized I'm a relationship guy. And so, my last position, it was a startup in Boston. And ultimately, COVID wiped out our business in about 4 weeks. And
so you were so that was a casualty of the early part of the pandemic then?
It was. Absolutely. Yep. So being in Boston, I think we were probably one of the hardest hit economies as far as COVID, just based with the lockdown and parameters.
Outside of New York.
Outside of New York, of course. And one of, not the most. And so I was kind of faced with a decision. Do I wait around for something that's at my level for another agency? Probably be waiting a while.
Like 18, 24 months, yeah.
Absolutely. Do I take a huge pay cut in half and start all over again with a different agency? Or do I start my own business? And that's what I've wanted to do for years. So COVID has kind of forced me, thankfully, to start my own business.
You're not the only one. I mean, it's accelerated not only industry acceleration, but personal development, like what you're describing. I mean, this is a blessing in disguise. And for some people, obviously, it's been detrimental to a lot of industry, a lot of business, a lot of people. But like you said, you're not the only one that has had this means of acceleration and almost an uncovering of what was there all along.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And what it did was it took the fear factor away, right? It was,
what do you have to lose?
Yep. You either do it or you don't. It's just how it goes.
So this was like April, May-ish timeframe. Is that when you were deciding, kind of going through this with your kind of your thoughts about, do I do this? Do I not do this? Like, was that in April, May?
No, that was in July.
Oh, that was in July. Okay.
Yep. It was actually, funny enough, serendipitously, it was my partner's birthday.
Happy birthday. I quit and I've started a business.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting ride since July, just getting the fundamentals and the foundation, but pleasantly surprised with what's come about.
So this is fascinating because I haven't had a guest on the show. By the way, James, this is the 20th episode in 2020. And so I set out a goal to do 20 episodes in 2020. You are like that celebration period in my life right now. So congratulations on episode 20.
Thank you.
But I haven't had somebody who started their business in COVID, which is a great thing. I started USA Staffing in 2010, which was the last recession. But more importantly, you're 6 months in and you're surviving. And so we'll get into a little bit of how that word surviving means to you, because it means something different to everybody.
Sure.
But this experience, this kind of fresh take on entrepreneurship is something that I'm fascinated with, because I believe there's a lot of people who are great team members. And then there's the select few who are going to be successful in entrepreneurship. And the first time I talked with you, you're definitely that type of person. You fit in that category where you've been an entrepreneur for decades and you didn't even know it. And now this is like that self evaluation, that the time to really self fulfillment, if you will, when you made this leap. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's interesting because you don't know what you don't know until you start just going after it and uncovering it.
Yeah.
So it's been a very interesting 6 months.
So when you started, let's say, you're thinking about this in June, July, what were like the top 3 things that you said, I want to do this differently with my business. I'm going to do this part differently. I'm not going to do that. What were those types of discussions you had with yourself that really you wanted to like make sure you stand out?
I think it was, my major consideration was really bringing it back to relationship. Really bringing it back to relationship, which is the core of what this business is. Mm-hmm. It's where all of the big boys kind of got started and then started to scale through acquisition, right? But if you look at the history of, Robert Half or Ronstadt, it's 2 guys who have a bunch of great relationships that are able to scale because they treat people well and they treat everybody well. It's not the person that can serve them now. It is everybody, because it was about service to everybody, not everybody being of service to them.
I agree 100%. I just finished a book by Reed Hastings, and he talks a lot about that, who started Netflix. And so it's a lot about, really getting to the core of, you work for the company, not the other way around. As an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you are put on stage to work for your employees in many ways. It might not be traditional work. It might just be emotional work or, financial work of getting everything set up and be successful. So I 100% agree with you on that. What were those kind of things that you said, I don't want to happen in my business? Were there any things like 1 or 2 points that you can point to that you were like, I'm not going to let that happen in my business?
I think so. That's for me, that's looking towards scalability, right? That's looking at how internal employees are treated in this business as you scale and you grow. Mm-hmm. And they should become your internal customers, right? These are the folks that are driving your business, they're driving your brand. And ultimately that wasn't really my experience in working with agencies, right? It was turn and burn. It was not all agencies are created equal in that respect, but it was a lot of turn and burn. It was a lot of hate mail from management all day about numbers and KPIs, and which turned into a lot of distraction. And so for me, what's not going to happen in my business, if I can avoid it, and I will do everything I can, is everybody will be, regardless of titles are free. Everybody is an integral part to growing your business. And if they're not, then you have the wrong people on the bus. So you need to respect people, understand the value they bring, and really celebrate them because they are your brand. And that's my ultimate goal in the long run.
You've been thinking about this for a while, I could tell.
10 years of working for third-party agencies, absolutely.
So what was the toughest challenge you've experienced over the last 6 months?
Realizing that it's mine. I think is probably something, and it depends on the day. It's still something that I grapple with from time to time, right? It's really understanding that this is mine to grow. This is my signature. And I need to celebrate that. I also think timeline and pace. I'm not a very patient individual, generally speaking. And so it's taken a little bit to get up and running, put the systems in place, start building out my network in the right way, or picking up where I left off and engaging those folks that I've worked with in the past and kind of sharing that and having conviction behind it. It probably took me about 3 months to get there. And again, it still depends on the day.
It doesn't go away. It lasts for a while. And in fact, years later, when you have new challenges, you're going to want to complain to the boss and you're like, oh, I'm the boss. But that's the journey. That's the game that we have chosen, right? It's the idea of practicing a sport, basketball, hockey, lacrosse, whatever sport you watch, you have to start, and then you have to constantly grow within that skill set. And in entrepreneurship, you have a natural ability, but then there's that growth that happens when you do actually start running your businesses. What kind of kid were you? Were you good at school? Were you always starting your lemonade stands? Were you mentioned you've done a couple real estate deals. Were those kind of business oriented?
Yeah. So, as a kid, I grew up in the middle of nowhere. So there wouldn't be anybody at my lemonade stand, even if I had one. I grew up in the woods of New Hampshire. But I will say that, as I got into high school, money and finance always fascinated me. Not for the sake of money and finance, but just how you can creatively make it and what it will provide in intangibles, right? And so I then started to put together my own kinds of deals, whatever that looked like, right? And it was, it's trade. It's trade. And so I was constantly involved in that. And then by the time I got into college, I put myself through school as a non-traditional student. I did pretty well in high school, just didn't have a whole lot of direction. And by the time I got into college, finance, creative finance, real estate, I started reading about, different ways, equities and different ways to duplicate and multiply so that your money worked for you, which really fascinated me. Real estate in particular still very much fascinates me from that perspective.
As a game or as a means to an end? Like, is your means to an end something that because it sounds like you were saying fascinated with finance because it can get you somewhere else. It can change your approach on things, or is it the game of finance you want to get good, like the game of Monopoly? Like what is it about it?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think that anybody who has a fascination wants to gain some level of mastery over whatever their interests are, right? And so there's that. But then I also see every opportunity as a gateway for other opportunity. So for me, being in the staffing business, you're creating a revenue generation machine. And then with that revenue generation machine, you can then, because it becomes self-perpetuating at some point, right? And you hire people to do the day-to-day, but then you've got this revenue generating machine that you can go, okay, great. I have now this capital that I can go out and I can use to do some other cool stuff with other cool people that are outside of this particular industry. And to me, that's the joy of this, right? That's the end goal, is to be able to scale, watch people succeed after training, get that aha moment, create the machine, and then be able to do it again. It's cool.
I'm surprised that you didn't learn this sooner in your life, because what you're saying is exactly what I've been, bleeding for the last 15 years, which is, and this I think goes to the fact that you love sales. You started as an account manager. You didn't start at that recruiting side. And so your sales head and your game of growth and personal development will get you much farther because you see the big picture in things. I think that there's something to be said if you love recruiting and you're great at recruiting and you could make a great living as a recruiter doing direct hires. That's wonderful. And then there's a lot of people that really have that self-actualization when they make 10 to 12 to 15 placements a year. And they're super happy. Their family life is great. But then there's guys like you, and you're like, I want a world dominating, type of approach. I want to not only dominate staffing, I want to dominate recruiting. I want to dominate real estate. I want to own a coffee shop down the street. To me, that's that entrepreneur bloodline in you that really, it gets me excited talking about it, because I love people that can both have a technical skill, but also see a big picture. And a lot of people I've been talking with really have a great vision on life. And I don't know if it's because of COVID or in spite of COVID, but something's changed in 2020 where there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are like waking up to be like, I need to start self-actualizing, and today is the day I start. And
sure.
And then the rest is history.
Well, absolutely. And I would say, for me, it's really the end. So if I'm thinking with the end in mind, it's how do I do something similar to what you're helping people do? How do I take somebody who has a passion around innovation, and they have a fantastic mechanical mind, but they don't really understand what it's like to get capital, to put together infrastructure. They know they can build something phenomenal, and then being able to work with them and say, here, this is your dream, great. I don't need a huge cut of it. I'll take something for my time. Okay. Yeah, I'll take something for my time. But ultimately, you help them achieve their goals, and then they pay it forward. Because that's what, for me, that's the long-lasting enjoyment of going through this work.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not about the money; it's about the helping other people self-actualize. For me, anyway, and so that's what really gets me excited about everything I do. And whether it's an investment or a new startup, I look at it from both a financial aspect, but also is this something that I can add value to and help them self-actualize in a way that they might not have been able to before? So,
sure.
So since the topic of this is staffing industry discussion, let's talk about the market strength in your business in terms of where are you focusing your time and what are you seeing on the front lines in Massachusetts, in the Northeast in general? Kind of what industries are you looking at right now?
Sure. What's interesting is Boston is a pretty fascinating geography because it's got a good mix of a lot of businesses and a lot of different industries. Where I'm seeing quite a bit of uptick is in the startup space. It is the pre-commercial space within biotech and pharma. Mm-hmm. It's high tech, whether it's medium-sized high tech, right? They're just beyond the startup phase, or it's high tech that supports healthcare, because healthcare is a major industry here in Boston. But what's fascinating to me is what I've been uncovering over the last month and a half or so is many startups are being funded faster and easier. And, I recently had a discussion with a gentleman, phenomenal guy, and he has an incredibly strong background in total rewards. And I didn't understand, if we have such a crunch from a funding perspective, why are all these VC backed and private equity backed companies releasing so many funds? And in brainstorming with him around that and talking it through, he said, well, you're going to have organizations, so mergers and acquisitions first, second quarter of next year are going to start going through.
Huge.
Organizations are going to start to, consolidate their brick and mortar, depending on in their real estate costs, and depending on the size of the organization, they're not going to be nimble enough to be able to accomplish all of those things fluidly without losing market share. And so with startups, if you give them a runway of 6 months, 9 months, as those larger organizations are starting to contract and consolidate, they'll be poised to gain market share because they'll be so nimble. It made a lot of sense to me. And so that's what, after that conversation, I really started to dig into those types of businesses that are either pre-funding or first round funding. And it's been a very interesting and eye-opening research project.
So are those incubators? Like, I know between Harvard, Boston, MIT, I mean, you have 6 major colleges right there or something like that, but are those part of like incubator type or college student programs, or are these kind of freestanding startups that you're finding?
It's a little bit of both, right? It's a little bit of both. It's comprised of both, but a lot of them they're freestanding and they're just getting started first or second year, generally speaking.
And they're willing to pay for talent, or are you coming in as a consultant to help them structure their human capital management needs? Because I think that with that type of situation, there's the recruitment, there's the staffing, but then there's human capital management as an idea that they can kind of look for somebody's advice to give them advice on who they should hire permanent, who they should hire temporary, and everything in between.
Sure. So here's what I can say. Generally speaking, these are very technical people that understand what their go-to-market strategy is and what problem they solve. They don't tend to be exceptional at people management or hiring, right? They're process-driven, which is great, but they're hyper-focused on what they're delivering. And So they welcome quite often somebody to come in and alleviate that burden.
And they'll do it. And they'll do it on a retainer, by the way.
Yes, of course. And what's even more interesting is, over the last 6 months of my journey, I've been working with and creating this fantastic group of consultants who have individualized specialization within organizational change and HR transformation. And so, because they have their own individual designation specialization within that function, naturally it's a full service offering, whether it's their client or it's my client. We have the opportunity, being pre-vetted, to trade business back and forth, exchange ideas on what that management process looks like based on the size and the projections of the business.
I 100% agree. It's the same idea of a CFO organization that has specialty accountants for retail versus restaurants versus staffing. You put together the lineup, the superstars of your HR, and that's really where HR, or human resource capital management, is really, managing those specialists. Maybe you can even do some shared services between these startups. They might only need 20 hours a week from certain specialists, and you might be able to provide them that consulting to let them know, hey, you don't actually need to pay 40 hours a week. You can pay 20 hours a week for this type of skill set.
Well, absolutely. And going down that road, it's interesting because for me, from a growth perspective, the folks that I'm working with who are so entrenched in this information are forcing me to become a subject matter expert, which means I have a far better opportunity to consult in ways they don't expect. So it's been interesting. To your point, great. You need 10 hours a week? Fantastic. If it's me, okay. If not, I have somebody else that can plug and play.
Very cool. That's taking that whole approach of recruiting, staffing, temp to perm, and really taking it to the next level, which is being that consultant to not only, it means more to those entrepreneurs who are technically smart, and you're the entrepreneur that's a solutions driven approach. And so you mix your solutions with their technical expertise. There's no reason why they shouldn't get more funding because you're on board. I mean, you are an asset to them, just like the technical developer that they have on their team or the technical scientist they have on the team. And so you can become, a key component of the success of these organizations, which I think is a great play, especially in a market where there's so much venture capital, so much tech innovation. I mean, everything is really primed to be successful. And I'll even add one more thing. Not only will the large companies consolidate, but I think that new solutions will be needing, and those new solutions will be developed by the startups. And so if you can get in with them on a consulting, you'll be able to do all their direct hires for the rest of perpetuity, or you can do all their temp to perms, or you can do, if they need a bridge funding for 6 months and they only have 4 months worth of capital, you could help them with a temp to perm solution or whatever it is. Sure. And those venture capital can see that and say, wow, Jamison was the one that helped get through the last 6 months through the use of recruiting techniques, downsizing staff, upsizing staff. I think it's really valuable. And I see a lot of value specifically in that Boston market, like you're talking about. It probably wouldn't succeed in other areas. Tampa does have a very large startup opportunity, but it doesn't have the venture capital, the venture-backed opportunity as much as the Boston area does.
Oh yeah, most companies in I would say 0 to 500 employees are either PE-backed or VC-backed, especially in the med device space, pharma space. Everybody wants to go commercial, IPO, and away they go. Right? It's the dream. So. There's plenty of that here. It's alive and well.
So would you say what industry are you representing, or is there a niche? I mean, I know you're talking about the consulting from human capital management, HR, but when you're building up your candidate data, how are you approaching candidates versus customers? Are you building a database? Are you waiting to get orders? Like, what is your strategy?
Yeah, so it's an interesting methodology, right? I mean, it's what most boutique firms would run on. And because I'm a relationship guy, my clients are my candidates are my clients. Anybody that I talk to, it's really a conversation about both sides of the coin. It's, if you want to make a move, great. How can I help you with that? If you are just passively taking a look at the market, okay, great. What else is my value add to you, right? So is it reviewing your resume? Is it helping somebody else you know? If you're still in a hiring capacity, well, we're talking about you, but I can still be of value to you where you are now. What does your team look like? What are the deficiencies, right? So it's really meeting people where they are now and what they need now, whatever that looks like. And it seems to be a pretty refreshing approach because it really is all about the solution. It's kind of choose your own adventure, right? So how can I be of service? What do you need from me? And that's what I do.
Do you find that's hard to transition from working on orders and having customers you need to pull orders from when you were an employee 6 months ago to now waking up every morning being like, what should I do, boss? I don't know, boss. How about you go and do some business? Okay, boss.
Sure.
do you do that conversation? Because I do.
Well, it's so interesting you say that. I think it's about getting into a new routine. So I'm a routine-oriented person. I thrive in routine. When I don't have a routine, it throws me off. It'll throw my whole day off. Potentially could be my whole week, right? So I don't have that conversation of what should I do today? I have no idea. Well, we'll just kind of wing it. Not all that often. I think in the summertime, while I was at the beach, that's harder, right? But having my own space, and I get up every morning just like I would be getting in my car. I come into my office and I just get started on my plan. As far as orders and fulfilling orders, I don't see a whole lot of difference. I have pretty much the same tools I would have if I worked for somebody else, and it's leveraging those tools the way that I know how to do that. Except for now, I'm far more interested in leveraging the efficiencies of those tools because my time is limited. But as far as approach to the business, etc., no, I don't find any difference whatsoever. I think for me, it's when it gets difficult, right? It's, I haven't had any wins. I've been talking to a lot of people. And so for me, what I've found helpful is I have a network for that, right? I have a lot of people who I have phenomenal relationships with that I've known for a long time and collaborated with for a long time. Most of them are former colleagues, right, that I've worked with. They're my cheerleaders, and I need cheerleaders like any other person. I have just put together a network of people that I can kind of phone a friend and be like, I'm losing it. And it works.
There's a whole bunch of those types of organizations. Some of them are like the Entrepreneur Organization. Some of them are Vistage. Some of them are just the Chamber of Commerce. And so a lot of those organizations are just that people, but I call it the circle of influence. And when I talk with like my team, it's really, you need those people in your life that, like you mentioned, the cheerleaders, but also just to bounce off ideas. It gets a little bit challenging as you go through this experience in running your business, because there's going to be some challenging weeks that turn into months, that turn into years. And then there's going to be a whole bunch of wins, and you're going to, want to celebrate. And I hope that you have all those people to celebrate with, but sometimes the wins aren't as obvious to everyone else. Sometimes it's really just making a discovery about a new process. And when you tell people, hey, I got this new process, they're like, okay, great. So those are the wins that I found are the toughest, because you're like, I finally achieved something that's meaningful and it really enhances me, but if you're not in it, sometimes people can't really understand it. And that's where I've leaned on other entrepreneurs, and that's where I've leaned on other staffing firm owners and recruitment firm owners. And, really just trying to surround yourself with people that have your best interest in mind. And so that's great that you have that already. So are you involved with the Chamber of Commerce there, or is there such thing in Boston?
Yeah, so I have not yet gotten involved with the Boston Chamber of Commerce. I am a member of the LGBTQ Massachusetts Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce for Boston specifically is likely going to be in the next 3 to 6 months that I'll get involved. Just because a lot of the events that they do and the networking opportunities are skewed at this point. And I just want to make sure that, one, I'm completely established and settled before I go on a grander scale. And two, that there's a lot more value as far as being a member of that chamber. But I see a tremendous amount of value in being part of chambers and other networking groups wholeheartedly.
Nice. What is the benefit that you're getting out of the kind of the experience of sharing what you're going through? Do you have people you can talk with and like tell the story on a day-to-day basis in terms of, hey, or do you just have to kind of live it by yourself? Do you have that community right now where you can like tell a story and they all listen?
Yeah, I do actually. And I think that points back to, the cheerleader population, I guess, or, the really close people that want to see me succeed. Generally speaking, if, when I have wins or something's exciting, or even if it's horrible as a day, I can call probably one of 7 or 8 people and they can either celebrate with me, talk me off the ledge, or give me feedback. What's great is they all happen to be in the business. So I can say, this is an approach that I'm using. This is something that I'm doing. This is the result that I'm seeing. You've done this for 20 years. Where can I improve that? Where are the pitfalls? Where systematically, what can I change? And they're happy to collaborate with me on that. We're competitors, but there's so much market share in this business, and there's a lot of trust. They don't have to worry that I'm going to try and steal their clients, because we have an unspoken hands-off, policy. It's really just about support.
Well, make sure you add me to your list of people. If you ever need a call, I'm always here for you. So.
Will do.
So what else in terms of your kind of industry analysis within your market or within your industry, what are hot topics that you want to talk about or discuss on your end?
Well, I think there are a lot of it. So COVID has done a lot of things, for sure, internally with businesses. And organizations are looking at their staffing strategy in a fairly unique way, whether it's going to be FTE or it's going to be heavy gig. I don't think anybody knows until fourth quarter earnings come out. I mean, yes, anticipation is going to be very, very contract heavy, I would say, for 18 to 24 months. There are going to be other industries that are performing, but where I'm finding some interesting pockets of need are around diversity, equity, and inclusion, GDPR, and employer branding, right? So organizations typically do a really good job at promoting their products, marketing their products externally. Small to medium-sized organizations don't do a great job at promoting their culture, creating internal champions, things of that nature, right? And then compliance is a huge piece to what staffing is going to look like. There are going to be hard and fast metrics in the next year and a half around diversity, equity, and inclusion, both from a supplier perspective, but most importantly, internally. So organizations are now going to start to be benchmarked over what their makeup is. What are the demographics?
Do you think that's going to be on a public space or the private sector as well?
So I think it's gonna start in the public, and like most things that are in the public sector, it will trickle down to private, right? And not necessarily from a regulatory perspective, but certainly from a cultural perspective. In order for organizations that are small to medium sized to be able to attract talent, their organizational makeup is going to have to be attractive to them. Otherwise, they would stay. So they won't be able to bring big company knowledge and efficiencies to enhance their businesses and help them scale faster and more efficiently if their makeup doesn't look similar to that of larger organizations.
Even in the setting of 10% unemployment rate, do you still feel that good talent is going to be extremely picky?
From what perspective? So good talent as far as what they're looking for?
Well, I'm just thinking of the opportunity for a person, are they with 10% unemployment rate, let's just say that sticks around for 12 months.
Sure.
Will the best talent really have the luxury of shopping around who they want to work for? Because ultimately, wherever the talent goes, they have that impact for that bigger talent to affect the private companies so that they can ultimately affect the public companies. So do you think that there's going to be some kind of challenges to overcome when that unemployment rate's higher than 2%, like we saw in January?
So if I'm looking at it from a direct hire perspective, top tier talent is always going to be choosy. It's always going to be marketable. Organizations are always going to pay for the top 5%. Period. Doesn't matter what the economy does. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. If you're top tier talent, you have your druthers, right? You can choose where you want to work. You have everybody chasing you. You have 100 of me calling you every day, right? Or emailing you, or whatever that looks like. I think with those folks, that's going to be the case. I do think that's going to be a smaller subsect of the population.
Yeah.
And where employers were scrambling, to complete processes in 2 weeks, 9 months ago, we're watching, at least I'm seeing those processes, and most of the people that are in my network are seeing the same thing. They're now elongated to 6-7 round interviews, a predictive or personality index, all these other cognitive assessments, and then sometimes or many times the internal recruiter kind of ghosts because hiring managers, and that's a whole different topic as far as why, how people are hiring, why they're not really hiring, what that all looks like. So I do think that this is 10% unemployment makes that number smaller than it was 9 months ago. But I do think they'll always pay for that. Now, what I do see a lot of is conversations about very high level contracting, right? So where most folks wouldn't have necessarily, they would rather have taken on an FTE at a specific higher level. They're now far more willing to look at somebody that's at a high level, director level, VP level, whatever the case may be, and entertain a traditional long-term contract.
Why?
Well, I think there's a lot around that as well. But it's no secret organizations have taken a huge financial hit. To what impact, no one really knows yet. And so as they start to look at, okay, do we need to go through an acquisition, do we need to go through a merger to stay alive? They need to be attractive. How do you stay attractive? You don't have a huge overhead, that's for sure, right? And so I think that's a part of it. if they don't need to go through any kind of an acquisition, a merger process, then with market indicators, they're likely going to need to create flexibility and be agile in whatever the new market is. And so they need people that can come in, get the job done, maybe scale them back. They start out at 40, 50 hours a week. They get the majority of the infrastructure in place. They can then scale them back by 15 hours a week, 10 hours a week, whatever that looks like, to keep things going at a higher level while they have lower cost function actually producing the work.
We saw this a lot in 2018 where people would come in and they would have a frank conversation with the candidates. I'm wondering if do you think this is going to happen where the privately held companies go to a candidate and say, this is the project. We need this over the next 9 to 10 months. I want you to come in and create the sales department and hire 4 people and run the sales department as our employee. But I want to let you know ahead of time that we're not going to need you as much in 12 months from now. Do you think that that's kind of the story you're talking about, which is an agreement between an employee and a company that might have limited skill set increased skill set in the future, in the near future, but then limited hours in the future? Do you think that kind of approach is going to come back? And if so, do you think it's going to be all industries, or do you think it's just going to be in that privately held, looking good on paper industry?
It's an excellent question. So yes to the first question. I do think that organizations are going to be bringing people in. They're going to bring in multidisciplinary teams to make sure their systems are streamlined, they're efficient, they've built the department out, and they will likely keep them on in a limited capacity to make sure that it doesn't break.
That happens a lot in startup companies in the development space. They'll bring on somebody who specializes in this specific type of code or development or layouts, but they know that, hey, long term, this isn't a 5-year job for you. Like we're not going to need you for 5 years. We need your expertise. We'll pay you well. We'll treat you well. We'll pay you as a W-2. But I want to let you know ahead of time that in 10 months from now or 5 months from now, we're only going to need you for 10 hours a week. And I think that's, in my definition, the opportunity that many recruitment firms, direct hire and temporary staffing firms, don't understand is that if you can open up your mind to human capital management and you approach it like a venture capital management company where you're going to give them the employees, give them the talent they need when they need it, and scale back and make it a norm, you're going to have candidates who are going to flock to you, because candidates who are really skilled, some of them want to be at a company for 5 years, but a lot of them want to learn this skill set for 10 months, then add on to their skill set in a different capacity for the next 10 months, and then a different capacity for the next. So until they really get to a spot where they feel like they've mastered an area of skills. And I think that human capital management, I think there's a huge blue ocean opportunity for recruiting and staffing firms throughout the country. If you can wrap your head around the idea that you're a solution provider for private and public companies, and you're going to manage their human capital management, and you're going to create pathways, you're going to create, compliance issues, but more importantly, you're going to help them maximize and fine tune the dials for where you need this developer, where do you need this sales manager, and maybe you need a higher level salesperson that's just to develop the strategy. But then once it's up and running, you can just do a sales supervisor or an account manager. And I think that when you talk about human capital management, that's the solution that a lot of companies are waiting for. They just don't know they need it yet.
I would agree. And, I also think that there's something to be said about local labor arbitrage, which is to your point, when we initially look at labor arbitrage, it's really about where in the world, can we do that? And I think we're going to be looking at where in the country, because now that we've gone to a dominantly remote workforce with productivity levels that are at or above, location doesn't matter anymore. which is also going to change the landscape of hyper-local recruiting, right? And candidate generation, because anybody can work anywhere. So and there are different costs. There are different costs to doing business in different areas in this country alone. Cost of doing business in Nebraska certainly isn't the same as doing business in Boston. So it means that you can then outsource essentially your workforce with your headquarters here to Nebraska, where that's going to be the dominant workforce that you employ, keeping your costs low and not needing to go global with it, which means cultural continuity to some degree, which is a lot of the challenge that labor arbitrage globally brings to an organization. So,
did you ever work remotely when you were working as an employee? Did you ever work remotely?
I did.
How much of your time was it? Do you remember?
So there was, I did a year that was 100% remote. Didn't love it. Didn't love it at the time. But I also had different ideals and different goals at that time.
It'll be fascinating because I'm not convinced we're going to stay as a predominantly remote community, as a workforce. I think that it's going to be a mix. It's going to be a hybrid. Yes. I still think there's going to be candidates that need to be close to an office because especially, and I'll tell you this from experience, especially from startup land, the best way to be flexible and to make pivots relatively quickly is to sit around a table and say, this isn't working, this isn't working. And I've had these discussions with, on Zoom, on Teams, like this, virtually. It's just not the same energy as it was when everybody's in the room. I think we'll get better at it. I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. I think the technology will catch up, but there's still going to be this innate human desire to be in the same room at least every once in a while. Mm-hmm. And so who knows, what that means. I think that there is some component to having a Nebraska office where you outsource it. But I think that company culture, you're going to have to do a little bit of bridging so that they'll probably have a remote office in Nebraska, but it'll be an actual remote office. It's not going to be everybody working from home. And so I think that it'll be interesting. It'll be a combination. I think flexible workspace is going to be here. I think we're going to get better at flexible workspace. I think that we're going to get better at office design, but ultimately, I'm not convinced that 80% of the workforce is still going to be remote in the next 24 months.
I'm not either. I mean, so, the only thing that separates us from chimps is that we're collaborative in that we're collaborative and we're community-based animals. So you can't be in a two-dimensional world and function completely. I mean, you can, but there's a lot of issues that will come from that, right? And is it worth it? So the hybrid model, I agree with you. I think it's going to be 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 3 days a week, 2 days a week, whatever that looks like on rotation. Companies will still be able to scale back their real estate costs in brick and mortar because they only have 2/3 of their workforce in at any given time, or 1/3, or whatever that is, that magic number is for them. And they'll still be able to achieve the savings that they need to help offset whatever their losses are here, right? And enhance their bottom line. But I agree with you. Also 90% of communication between people is nonverbal, right? It's body language. And so if you don't have that, to your point, from a cultural perspective, how do you create and maintain cultural continuity across a multicultural workforce without being in person, at least partially, for those nonverbal cues to create inherent trust, which is what most people look for within their teammates. The rest can be taught.
I think I'll go on record right now, and I'm going to say 20 hours and 20 hours. I think it's going to be a split 50-50 in 24 months, the norm. I'm going to call it right now, 2022. It's going to be 50% remote, 50% in office, and that's going to be the standard. That's my prediction, but we'll actually see where it actually goes. So
I think it depends on the industry, but I would agree with you.
Yeah, cool. Jamison, I'm really I could talk all day about this. I think we probably should wrap it up. I'd love to just pull up your website before we get going, and just kind of see how how can people get a hold of you if they want to continue this discussion, or if they want to learn more about the Boston market in general. What's the best way that they can connect with you?
Email me, text me, call me. Any way works. Whatever works best for somebody else and whatever is comfortable.
And I pulled up your website, Commonwealth-staffing.com. Anywhere that they can go here, that would you recommend the phone number on here, the request a consultation? Where's the best place for them to explore your website?
Either one. So if they request a consultation, put in your information. I'll definitely get back to you within 24 hours. And then if you want to call me, the telephone number is right there on the front of the website. I'm happy to talk with anybody about this. It's something that I really enjoy, and I always like a different perspective.
Okay. Any other way they can follow you? Are you on Instagram or Twitter or anywhere else?
So I haven't connected all those things. It's still in the works. It's on the to-do list.
All right.
But they can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Happy to.
All right. Well, Jamison, any other last words that you'd like to, before we wrap it up? Anything else you want to say? Or?
No, I really appreciate you having me here. I really enjoyed the discussion. And, if anybody's interested in continuing the discussion, I would be delighted.
All right. Very good, Jamison. I want to let you go and I'll close out the show. Hold on one second. Well, you guys, this was a great show. Jamison, it has just this huge depth of knowledge on a technical skill. He understands the industry, not only in his local market, but also in his, region in terms of what's the difference between, like we talked about, Boston and Nebraska. I think he's a true visionary, and he's that entrepreneurial spirit that's really going to continue to evolve his business. And I'll be really interested to see, where he's at in 2 or 3 or 10 years from now in terms of, what new ideas he was able to develop. And so thank you, Jamison, for everything that you contributed to today's show. I want to also let you guys know that, we do these Facebook and YouTube lives. We also repost it on our social media. Please feel free to follow us, usastaffingservices.com. But you can also, I'm going to be releasing my podcast channel in the next 2 weeks. I'll send out new information about that. Next Monday, we have a special guest. We have 2 marketing companies. We're talking about marketing to customers, marketing to candidates. We're going to have a great discussion. It's going to be also in that staffing industry discussion platform. But we're really excited about Monday. So if you are interested, feel free to sign up for that as well. And then last but not least, I just appreciate everybody who's been listening and following along so far. And if you have any feedback, I'd love to take it. I want to make sure that I provide value to you, but also if you have any additional questions or thoughts, I'd love to answer them on the air as well. So thank you for everything you guys do. And I hope you have a great rest of the week, and talk to you soon.